On behalf of our client, Channel Lewis, we first want to acknowledge the tragic nature of Ms. Vetrano's death. We recognize the impact that her death has had on her family, her friends, and her community, and nothing in our statement seeks to diminish that. In sentencing Mr. Lewis in this case, we ask Your Honor to consider the pre-sentencing memorandum that was submitted along with letters of support from Mr. Lewis's neighbors, friends, and family. We also ask Your Honor to consider the support Mr. Lewis has in the courtroom with him today and that he's had throughout the two trials, including his mother and his sister. We also want to tell you who our client is. Mr. Lewis stands before you a 22-year-old man. Prior to his arrest in this case, at the age of 20, Mr. Lewis had never before been arrested. He grew up in East New York, Brooklyn, the son of immigrants from Jamaica. His father, Richard Lewis, worked as a teacher and an administrator in Jamaica and worked as a teacher in Brooklyn. His father is also a pastor. His mother, Vita Lewis, is a nursing assistant at an assisted living facility, a position she's held for the past 17 years. Mr. Lewis has 6 half-brothers and sisters. Both of his parents are naturalized citizens. His parents separated when he was 10 years old, and he split his time between his two parents' homes. Throughout his childhood and until the time of his arrest, he lived only with his family, his older sisters, and later young nieces and nephews. Channel and his family regularly attended church services, and they are a deeply religious family. Channel graduated from a high school for students with emotional disabilities, and he was working on enrolling in a vocational training program. The pre-sentencing memorandum we submitted has letters of support from community members. Specifically, a family friend and member of his church states that he's known Channel for 11 years and that he is a, quote, caring and pleasant young man. Another family friend writes that ever since Channel was a child, she's known him to be a loving and caring person, and she never once saw him get angry or raise his voice. She states that Channel would prepare a cup of tea for his mother after a long day at work and even rub her feet. Since Channel's arrest, his father, Richard, has decompensated significantly. He is now in a nursing home for patients with dementia. He's been unable to attend any of his son's court appearances, nor does he fully comprehend what is happening to his child. His mother, Vita Lewis, has also suffered a great deal since her son's arrest. Before his arrest, he always made sure Mrs. Lewis had dinner after a long shift, and the two of them were very close. His incarceration at Rikers in Orange County and at Riverhead has been tremendously difficult on the family and Mrs. Lewis specifically. Nevertheless, she's rearranged her work schedule to make every court appearance for the past 2.5 years, and she visits with Channel multiple times a week. The prospect of visiting her son in prison, potentially hundreds of miles away, is devastating to her, and she relies on her faith and her community to keep going. Again, Your Honor, there is no doubt that what happened to Karina Vetrano was a tragedy, and that her family and community have suffered an exceedingly difficult loss. We ask Your Honor to allow Mr. Lewis's sealed pre-sentencing memorandum, probation report, and accompanying documents to be entered into his packet as he is sentenced, so that he may be placed in a correctional facility that is best equipped to provide the social and vocational services that he needs. We thank this court for your consideration of all of these factors when imposing your sentence. We will be asking for a concurrent sentence, and we thank Your Honor.
Mr. Lewis, anything you wish to say to this court before I sentence you, sir?
One thing I want to say, Judge, is that I'm innocent. And I'm sorry for the family's loss, but I didn't do this.
Anything else? Anything else, Mr. Lewis?
No, sir. No, sir.
I can't hear you, Mr. Moore, I'm sorry.
Just briefly, Mr. Leventhal made some reference to our probation report and the information that was contained in it. And while it's true that we did not pursue a psychiatric defense in this case after careful consideration, that information was not put in there to allege in any way that Mr. Lewis is unfit to proceed. There's no traditional insanity defense type, but I think that that information should be included in your court's determination over what should happen to this young man. I think his background and intellectual, physical condition is something that you should take into account. The statement that was made that in some way, shape, or form the defendant had admitting the crime to the forensic psychologist is a stretch of an inference, I would submit to the court. As the court's aware, when people are being interviewed for possible psychiatric defenses or conditions, those professionals need to know the context of why they're there and what happened that led them to be there. And of course, when this doctor did that, he had all that information available to him and knew about this case and the facts of this case. So I just want that to be clear before you pronounce your sentence, Judge.
I've been personally involved in the criminal justice system virtually my entire adult life. And I got to say, quite honestly, that it's sometimes difficult not to become jaded or even sometimes numb. And not only what I see, but what we collectively see on virtually a daily basis. And then you're confronted with a crime such as this. Not to say that one victim's life is more precious than another victim, or one family's grief is more impactful than another family's grief. But a case like this has an effect to shake you because it kind of dispels the fallacy that as long as we confine ourselves to our neighborhood and do what we do on a daily basis in the presence of our loved ones and our neighbors, we're somehow safe. We want to believe that, we have to believe that, and then we just can't believe it because this is what happens. A random, senseless, horrific crime like this happens, and it has such a wide-ranging effect. We went through so many jurors in 2 cases who said we can't sit here because not only do we know about the case, we've modified the way we live our lives. We tell our kids, now, don't go by yourself when you go run. You have to run. You can't go into a particular area. And it has this collective sense of grief. There's so much that we're exposed to, and so much I just still can't comprehend. As long as I've been doing this, it's a lose-lose situation for both families, always, always, always. But there is something that keeps me going. Clearly, I believe this with all my heart, every fiber of my being, that God, who is at this very moment embracing Karina Vetrano, I believe this, who is providing solace and comfort not only to the family, but to the community who's suffering your crime, that same God is ready, willing, and anxious to forgive you for this crime. One person and one person can make that happen, Mr. Lewis, and that's you. Your protestations of being innocent, that was not designed for me. It was designed for your followers, I'm sure. But in the not too distant future, you're going to wake up and you're going to find that a lot of these followers have moved on to another cause, another case, and you're going to be by yourself, very, very lonely. And I suggest to you at that point, you put into practice the penance that you researched after you brutally and savagely molested and murdered this young girl. That's my advice to you. But I will say one thing. When you do, and if you do, come to that decision, you're going to do it inside a cage. That's a guarantee. With respect to murder in the first degree, The sentence of this court is that you spend the rest of your natural life in jail without any possibility of parole. With respect to murder in the second degree, intentional murder, the sentence of this court is that you spend 25 years minimum, maximum of life. Third count, felony murder, the sentence of this court is that you're sentenced to 25 years to the rest of your natural life. With respect to sexual abuse in the first degree, the sentence is that you have a determined period of incarceration of 7 years, followed by 10 years of post-release supervision. Counts 1, counts 3, and counts 4 are to run concurrent. Count 2 is to run consecutive to counts 1, 3, and 4. With respect to count 4, there's a Sex Offender Registration Act that you must sign, a mandatory surcharge of $300, crime victim assistance fee of $25, DNA fee of $50, sex offender registration fee of $50, and a supplemental sex offender victim fee of $1,000. Come out of inmate funds, advise this defendant of his right to appeal.
For the record, reflect the defendant's being handed a copy of his right to appeal. Point of the
Maintain the audience. Justice for Chanel! Justice for
We have been watching the sentencing for Chanel Lewis. He has been given life in prison without possibility of parole for the murder and sexual assault of Queens jogger Karina Vetrano. Lewis's lawyers have said that they do plan to appeal the sentencing. We'll continue to follow this story as we get reaction from both families. Right now, we're taking a quick break. We'll be right back here on CBSN New York.